Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Gary Parker. Today we have episode 481 for May 18th, 2026. And we got a news show for you today. Plenty of stuff to cover. Just a couple quick news notes for you that didn't really warrant a whole reading of a story. First of all, Privacy Guides has come out with yet another really cool guide. If you recall, we talked about their activism guide that they had a while back, which is not really just for activists, but it's certainly applicable to activists. And now they've got a new one called the Data Protection Authority guide, and it allows you, depending on your location, to figure out who your local privacy authorities are and how to report privacy violations. Very handy guide. There's a link in the show notes to that. Also, Apple is finally rolling out end-to-end encryption with RCS messaging. This is something that Google came up with some time ago, and RCS is kind of like the new version of SMS. It's kind of like SMS 2.0. It's got all the reactions and the things that we've all become used to now. You know, within a given ecosystem, within Google Messages or within Apple Messages, we've got all these things. But across them, together, when you try to communicate Android people to iPhone people, it doesn't always work. And one of the key things missing is end-to-end encryption for messaging when you go that route. It's just starting to roll out. It's carrier dependent, though it looks like a lot of US carriers are going to be supporting it, but it still may take time to roll out. And we're still going to have green bubbles and blue bubble differences if you're on an iPhone. Green bubbles for talking to somebody who's not on an iPhone. But if it says RCS, and hopefully it'll indicate in some fashion that it is end-to-end encrypted, we can now thankfully have truly private conversations. So that is starting to roll out, and we should all be getting that in the coming months, I would say. And then finally, I interviewed Key Jeffries, CEO, founder of Session, which I think is a really cool decentralized app. Now, I mean, it's got some interesting aspects to it. We talked about that on the interview. But even though we've got a lot of options now for true end-to-end encrypted messaging, we really don't have a lot of decentralized versions of that. And Session was kind of a hybrid thing anyway. It does have nodes, but there's a lot of them. There's not one central place that you could, pull a plug and the whole system would go down. So anyway, they are struggling for cash at this point. I'm not sure what they're doing. They're basically on life support. I would say donate to them, but I don't know if just average donations is going to be enough to save these guys. They probably need an influx of cash from somewhere. But anyway, I was kind of sad to hear that, and especially after I just interviewed Key. I thought he was a good guy. All right, so here are the news stories we're going to be covering today. First of all, Venmo has finally, after, many, many years, changed their default privacy for future purchases to be private by default. Also, the FCC has relaxed some of the router ban language to allow software updates on the banned routers, which also makes no sense. We talked recently about how Meta was going to be recording the keystrokes and the computer interactions of all of their employees. Well, it turns out the employees weren't too happy about that. Proton is introducing post-quantum encryption, and I haven't talked about post-quantum stuff for a while, so I thought it would be a good time to touch base on that. ChatGPT is putting ads in their free versions of their chatbot. And unfortunately, like most ads today, that comes with tracking. So we're going to talk about how to turn that off. All these AI models are trained on lots and lots of data. Unfortunately, it turns out some of that data is personal info. And we've got a story about how AI chatbots are giving out people's real phone numbers. Canada has come back with a new version of its surveillance nightmare bill. This one is dubbed C22. And Utah has a new law that is going into effect that is trying to make VPNs not anonymous. AI chatbots are wanting your health records now, and that is dangerous. We'll talk about why. Microsoft Edge apparently is saving all your passwords encrypted until you launch their Edge browser, and at that point, all the passwords are stored in clear text, which is horrible security. The student school platform called Canvas, actually it was its parent company, was attacked by ransomware, and a lot of these services right during finals week, which I'm sure was no coincidence, were out of business, but they are back, but there's still some lessons to be learned there. And then finally, the Chrome browser from Google apparently is silently installing a 4 gigabyte local LLM on everyone's computers. And there's actually several things wrong with that. And then, of course, I'll have the next installment of my tip of the week about downloading all of your historical emails. So, lots to discuss. Let's get to it. All right, first up, this is from 9 to 5 Mac, and it's about Venmo finally going mostly private. Anyway, problems with Venmo privacy were first highlighted way back in 2018. A security researcher demonstrated how the API could be used to obtain an alarming amount of personal data about users of the digital cash app. A related vulnerability was still in place in 2024 when it was used to highlight potentially embarrassing information about U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. A new report says that the company is very belatedly fixing the problem. The problem has been that both Venmo transactions and the messages which accompany them have been public by default, along with your contacts in the app. Venmo did later offer the opportunity to keep your contacts private, but this still wasn't set as the default. That saw the issue hit the news again in 2024 when it revealed a contradiction between J.D. Vance's claimed scorn of the elite with his own extensive network of contacts. And I believe there was a whole bunch of people in there from Yale or Harvard or something. Anyway, parent company PayPal claimed at the time that this was a feature rather than a bug and declined to fix it. However, the company finally seems to have had a change of heart, telling The Verge that it is changing the default privacy settings. And I guess this is from The Verge. Venmo is starting to test a big redesign of its app. As part of the changes, it will be implementing a major new privacy measure. The onboarding process for new users will set their posts to be only viewable by their friends by default instead of being public. The default setting will be friends, but it can change to just me. It's still not clear whether or not contacts will be publicly viewable by default. The piece says that the app will roll out over the next few weeks. Okay, so I've railed on Venmo for this for years. Venmo is a social app meant to kind of share what you're buying. But I mean, it was just dumb. People were posting that they were giving money to their drug dealers and making, very personal purchases, and they were public by default. Anybody could see them, and that was just dumb. I think even at one point, President Joe Biden had a lot of his transactions made public because they were public by default. So this is nice, but it's way too little and it's way too late. It sounds like it's only going to be for future purchases, and it sounds like it's also only going to be turned on by default for new users. So if you're an existing user, you definitely need to go back and find these new settings as soon as they become available, and make these things private. You probably had the option all along. So it sounds like all they're really doing here is for new users, it's going to be private by default, which that's what it should have been all along. And unfortunately, I've tried to find a good private peer-to-peer app for exchanging value. And Cash App is a little bit better than Venmo, but not great. I mean, you could use PayPal, you can use Zelle, which is, mostly from banks, but I don't see a lot of young people these days whipping out their phone to Zelle somebody some money. Apple Cash is actually pretty good. If you're trying to give money to somebody and you both have iPhones, that's actually pretty easy, and it's, I think, fairly private. Certainly way more private than Venmo. But it's only for Apple products, so, when you're doing transactions, you really need to be able to do it with anybody. So just a quick note, I recently interviewed Rainey Reitman from the Freedom of the Press Foundation about her new book, Transaction Denied, and we talk a little bit about financial privacy in that interview, so stay tuned for that. All right, next up, this is from Info Security Magazine, and it's an update to the stupid FCC policy. The U.S. Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, has extended the deadline for owners of banned internet routers to provide security updates to U.S.-based users by 2 years. In March of 2026, the Commission banned the import and sale of all quote-unquote consumer-grade internet routers produced in a foreign country, citing an unacceptable risk to the national security of the U.S. The ban meant that all such routers are now placed in the FCC's covered list, and a covered list is really a banned list. The only exceptions include routers that have been granted a conditional approval by the U.S. Department of Defense or Department of Homeland Security. Alongside the ban, the FCC also notified manufacturers of these banned routers in March that they could still ship security updates to U.S.-based customers until March of 2027. In a new public notice published on May 8th, the Commissioner's Office of Engineering and Technology now said that it is extending this deadline at least until January 1st of 2029. This extension only applies to software and firmware updates that mitigate harm to U.S. consumers. This means that suppliers of banned devices are not allowed to add new features via this mechanism. The same extension applies to foreign-made drone systems and drone-critical components, which were banned for the sale in the U.S. in December of 2025. All right, this is this is just more stupidity. I mean, if you don't trust the hardware, why should you trust the software? And honestly, the real threat has always been the software anyway. This is really dumb. Since the ban was announced in March, Netgear and Eero routers, EERO, have been given a waiver on this, and maybe more will follow. I mean, all consumer routers today are made outside the US. So if you ban those, there aren't any more routers. So anyway, those are two very popular companies in the US. For whatever reason, they appear to have gotten a pass. And honestly, I dug into it a little bit, and it looks like, at least in part, the reason they got this waiver was because these companies have committed to increasing, probably from zero, their U.S. manufacturing, which is really what this thing is about. It was just so transparent when this came out that all they're really trying to do is force some of these companies to open plants in the U.S. to make these routers, which would probably make them cost twice as much. Anyway, it's really, really dumb. And none of this makes sense, but the extension also doesn't make sense. All right, next up, this is from Reuters, and we talked, I think it was the last news show, about how Meta, or the Facebook company, had announced to all their employees that they were going to be installing software on their computers, their work computers, that would monitor everything they do. And supposedly it was not about performance or anything like that. It was to help them train AI systems. Well, it turns out the employees didn't really like that much. So they got together and they are now petitioning Meta, their employer, to stop this. So actually, I've just got a couple paragraphs from the Reuters article, and then I'm actually going to read to you their letter to Mark Zuckerberg. So Meta employees distributed flyers at multiple U.S. offices on Tuesday to protest the company's recent installation of mouse tracking software on their computers. And by the way, I think it's way more than just mice. I think it's keyboards and other stuff too, and screenshots. According to photos of the pamphlets seen by Reuters, the flyers, which appeared in meeting rooms, on vending machines, and atop toilet paper dispensers at the Facebook owners' offices, encouraged staffers to sign an online petition against the move. So the article goes on, but I thought it was actually more interesting to read the petition. So this is the slightly shortened form of what they sent to their bosses. Dear Mark and Meta leadership, I guess when you're working at Facebook, you just call them Mark. We demand that you not collect employee computer use data for the purposes of training AI models. Recently, leadership announced in a limited audience group that a program called MCI, or Model Capability Initiative, would be rolling out. For context, this program collects computer inputs such as mouse movements, click locations, and keystrokes, as well as screen content. When employees asked what privacy reviews were conducted, no completed privacy reviews were provided. The outlined privacy mitigations were vague, and the leadership's confidence in them appeared limited, evidenced by the selective opt-out afforded to executives. We are speaking up because it's expected of us, and more importantly, because it is the right thing to do. We are calling for a clear commitment that employees must not have their computer use data, also referred to as human-computer interaction data, collected for the purposes of training AI tools. Collecting and repurposing this kind of data raises serious concerns around privacy, consent, and trust in the workplace. Due to the nature of how this data collection works, it is inevitable that sensitive data such as social security numbers, protected health information, and other personally identifiable or confidential information will be collected and stored. Collecting this data introduces both security and regulatory risks for Meta, including the potential for breaches and unauthorized disclosure. We collectively believe that empowering individuals and communities through building responsible AI includes respecting their boundaries and privacy. Any approach to AI that relies on intrusive, coercive, non-consensual data collection contradicts that principle. It should not be the norm that companies of any size are permitted to exploit their employees by non-consensually extracting their data for the purposes of AI training. AI meant to serve and empower people cannot do so while disregarding or disrespecting the consent of the people it claims to serve. So, bravo, Meta employees. This is a good example of how we can push back on overreach and privacy intrusions collectively. Now, honestly, today, software engineers are nowhere near in the bargaining position they were just 5 years ago. About the time I retired, salaries for software engineering employees were skyrocketing, just getting crazy. And then in the age of AI, the early age of AI, they also went through the roof for anybody with any kind of AI background. But now these companies are saying, well, we could do more with this AI, so we're going to start laying off employees. And a lot of tech companies are doing that. So it's a pendulum swing. The market for software engineers, though, with AI, it's really kind of hard to predict where it's going to go from here. So they have collectively less bargaining power, but they still do have power. So honestly, we need a lot more petitions like this and a lot more employees, tech employees in particular, pushing back on their management and employers generally against things like this. So I was happy to see this. All right, next up, a quickie here from Proton. This is from their blog. They are rolling out post-quantum encryption. The quantum era is no longer a distant thought experiment. Quantum computers, advanced computing systems designed to solve complex problems that classical computers cannot, are not yet capable of breaking the encryption that protects email today. But the risk is real enough that security teams, standards bodies, and technology providers are already preparing for what comes next by adopting post-quantum encryption. Post-quantum protection is now available in Proton Mail, and all plans, including free. Once enabled, Proton Mail will generate and use post-quantum ready keys for new encrypted emails to protect your personal messages and business communications against today's threats and a future where current public key cryptography may no longer be enough. Note, post-quantum protection is being rolled out gradually in Proton Mail. If you do not see the option in your account yet, there is nothing you need to do. It will become available soon. Enabling PQC, or post-quantum cryptography, helps protect new encrypted emails going forward, and we plan to re-encrypt older emails in the future. The quantum era may not be here yet, but an attacker can collect encrypted data today and keep it for the future, hoping to decrypt it once quantum capabilities improve and proliferate. This is one reason the migration has already started across the industry. The most important security transitions usually start before the wider public is paying attention. By the time they become obvious to everyone, the organizations that waited are already behind. With PQC support in Proton Mail, we are taking a proactive step to help protect encrypted email against the threats of tomorrow without compromising the privacy guarantees that matter today. So, okay, yeah, I think I pretty much covered it here, but quantum computers are really still in their infancy. They are very hard to make. They're hard to keep stable because I think they're at very low temperatures. And it's still mostly, honestly, theoretical. I mean, not that they don't have quantum computers today, they do, but they're very, very small and lightweight by comparison to what would be needed to actually crack modern cryptography. Modern public key cryptography relies on very hard math problems, things that are easy to do in one direction but extremely difficult or nigh impossible to do in reverse. And most of them today are based on factoring very large integers, and I mean massive. If you take two prime integers and multiply them together, you get another big number. But if you take that one massive integer and say, okay, what are the two prime factors that went into making it, that math problem is extremely difficult. And that's what we counted on for encrypting messages with public key crypto. Now, it turns out that quantum computers are much better because they're actually they work differently. It's hard to explain, but they work differently in such a way that that particular math problem becomes easier, not trivial, but easier to reverse. Meaning that once these things are powerful enough, which is many, many years down the line, honestly, they could theoretically break encryption for modern messages today. So a lot of responsible companies like Proton and Signal have already started implementing post-quantum cryptography. We've been working on this for years. The scientific community saw this coming. They've put out all sorts of potential post-quantum cryptography methods that are using math that's very difficult for a quantum computer to break and a regular computer to break. They went through all this vetting process, and this all happened over recent years, and they've come up with several algorithms that are highly reviewed and are ready to go. And so Proton here is saying that we are rolling that out, and for all new messages that'll be using it, once you turn this on, and I would recommend you do once you have it available, and then it's going to go back and re-encrypt your old emails as well. So good news. All right, next up, ChatGPT is starting to put ads in their free or Go tier versions of their product. Why? Because this stuff costs a lot of money and they got to pay for it somehow. So like everything on the internet today, they're deciding to make money by showing you ads. And as always, with these ads, sadly, comes tracking. In other words, surveillance. So if you are using ChatGPT, the free version or the Go version, Go tier, you will be seeing ads and you will also be being tracked. Now, this article actually goes through some details about how to turn this off. I'm not going to go into that because you'll never remember it. You should look it up anyway. I will just kind of give you the highlights, though. And so if you are using these things and would like to do this, you can go to the show notes, find this link, and then do it on your own time when you actually can sit down at your computer. All right, so this is from Online Safety. It's a Substack. The bottom line up front, if you use ChatGPT on the free or Go tier, OpenAI has opted you into a new ad tracking program by default. Like all personalized ads and ad tracking, you should turn it off. OpenAI updated its U.S. privacy policy on April 30th, 2026 to formalize a new advertising relationship with marketing partners. To their credit, they didn't do this silently, as LinkedIn did when it updated its privacy policy. OpenAI emailed users to let them know. Here are the salient parts of the email. And this is a quote, "We will now use cookies to promote OpenAI products and services on other websites. This does not impact your conversations in ChatGPT. Your conversations with ChatGPT are private and are not shared with marketing partners." And I'll just add a quick yet. I would not bet on that staying that way forever. So back to the article. That's the good news. The bad news is that the new tracking is turned on by default for free users, and most people will never go to their settings to change it. The updated policy introduces 3 new data practices for free users. 1, OpenAI now receives purchase data from advertisers. If you click on an ad in ChatGPT and then buy something from that advertiser, the purchase information flows back to OpenAI to measure how well the ad worked. This is a new direction of data flow that didn't exist in earlier versions of the policy. 2, OpenAI now shares your data with marketing partners. As the email above states, OpenAI now uses cookies to promote its products on other websites. Specifically, OpenAI shares cookie IDs and email addresses with advertising partners on platforms like Instagram and Facebook, so those companies can target you with ads promoting OpenAI's products on third-party sites. And finally, 3, the marketing privacy setting is on by default for free users. Okay, and then they say Wired here, so maybe this is somehow a quote from Wired. It says, "Wired directly tested 2 free ChatGPT accounts and confirmed that the toggle was automatically switched on. The 2 paying accounts they tested, one was a Plus account and one was an Enterprise account, did not have it on by default. If you don't go into your settings and turn this off, you are opted in. These changes apply to free and Go users only. Plus, Pro, Business, Enterprise, and EDU subscribers are not affected." Again, yet we'll see. It does note here that OpenAI says they are not doing. First, they do not share your conversation content with advertisers or marketing partners. The email is explicit on this. It says your conversations with ChatGPT are private and are not shared with marketing partners. 2, they don't show it in the pro stuff, yeah. 3, they do not show ads in temporary chats. I think those are meant to be sort of like incognito chats, but I would not consider them as such. And then 4, they do not show ads to users known or predicted to be under 18. So what should you do? And again, these details are in there, but I'm just going to tick off the steps that they recommend, and you can look up how to do these. First, turn off the marketing privacy. That's this new thing we're talking about here. 2, turn off personalized ads. I think this was already there. So yeah, definitely turn that off. 3, delete your existing ad data. That's always a good call if they allow you to do it. 4, don't forget the older privacy settings. And it talks about a few here. There's some model training stuff and some temporary chat stuff about sensitive communications, and an option to opt out of training their AI on your content. And apparently to change that, you need to go to privacy.openai.com. And then finally, the last one it recommends is that you just pay for it, which is something I've done. So I actually can't check this because I'm paying for the Plus plan, which is $20 a month. So if you come in at least at that level, currently anyway, you would be exempt from all of this ad stuff. So bottom line, this is not surprising. These guys are hemorrhaging money left and right. They're getting a lot of investment, but they're spending way faster than that. And I think they're finding that the processing of all of our queries is not being paid for, even by their paid accounts. So I expect prices actually to increase, but we shall see. All right, next up, this is from Technology Review. And it's saying that some AI bots were caught giving out people's personal phone numbers, probably among other things. So a Redditor, in other words, somebody on Reddit, recently wrote that he was desperate for help. For about a month, he said his phone had been inundated by calls from strangers who were, quote, looking for a lawyer, a product designer, a locksmith, unquote. Callers were apparently misdirected by Google's generative AI. In March, a software developer in Israel was contacted on WhatsApp after Google's chatbot Gemini provided incorrect customer service instructions that included his number. And in April, a PhD candidate in the University of Washington was messing around on Gemini and got to cough up her colleague's personal cell phone number. AI researchers and online privacy experts have long warned of the myriad dangers generative AI poses for personal privacy. These cases give us yet another scenario to worry about: generative AI exposing people's real phone numbers. Experts say that these privacy lapses are most likely due to personally identifiable information, or PII, being used in training data, though it's hard to understand the exact mechanism causing real phone numbers to show up in the AI-generated responses. But no matter the reason, the result is not fun for people on the receiving end. And even more worryingly, there appears to be little that anyone could do to stop it. Chatbots like Gemini, OpenAI's ChatGPT, and Anthropic's Claude are built on LLMs, or large language models, that are trained on huge amounts of data scraped from across the web. This inevitably includes hundreds of millions of instances of PII. As we reported last summer, for example, the large popular open source dataset DataComp Common Pool, which has been used to train image generation models, included copies of resumes, driver's licenses, and credit cards. The likelihood of PII appearing in AI training data is only increasing as the public data runs out and AI companies look for new sources of high-quality training data. This includes information from data brokers and people search websites. According to the California Data Broker Registry, for instance, 31 of 578 registered data brokers operating in the state self-reported that they had, quote, shared or sold consumers' data to a developer of a Gen AI system or model in the last year, unquote. There aren't straightforward solutions to this problem. There's no easy way to either verify whether someone's personal information is in a given model's training set or to compel models to remove PII. Yeah, okay, so that article had a lot more information. It had lots of examples that I just didn't have time to go through. So if this is interesting to you as a topic, definitely check out the full article. But it just in summary, it is pretty ugly. There's just a lot more cases, and it's just gross. So really, there's two issues here, though. We've trained these models on a lot of personal information. Some of it probably not on purpose, and yet it's still there. And we're just adding more to that. Now, as I like to say with AI, we didn't have to do it that way, but we did. And the second issue is that this isn't a simple database where you could just delete individual things. It would be like trying to remove a teaspoon of sugar from a cake after you've already baked it. This information is used to train these models, this massive amounts of information. All go in, and then it's just kind of magically represented by these mystical model weights. There's nowhere where you could poke in there and say, delete that part, delete this part, change that part. You can't do that after the fact. What we really need is a privacy law that prevents them from doing this in the first place. But one summary point to all of this is if you have data out there, take it down, remove it, because it's just waiting to be trained into somebody's AI model somewhere. It was bad enough when that data was just available to get leaked or hacked or ransomed, but now it's getting baked into AI models. So go back to my data diet series and some of my other blog articles on this about going out, finding your old accounts and your old data, and just delete as much as you can. And we're going to talk in the tip of the week today about doing that with your old emails. All right, next up, I got a couple articles here from the EFF. It was great talking to Cindy Cohen. She's such an amazing person. That was a great interview. I wish her the best, but I do hope that I will be able to talk to her again in the future. She was a lot of fun. Okay, so this one is about Canada's new C-22 bill, which is really just an updated version of a C-2 bill that fundamentally wants to break encryption. It's another case where the government is basically saying we need access to more data. We need to be able to do more surveillance on everybody. And it's not much of an improvement over the last one. So let me read portions here of EFF's response to this. Last year, the Canadian government pushed Bill C2, which would erode Canadian digital rights in the name of border security. The bill was so bad it didn't even make it to committee because of the backlash from the privacy community. Now, the spring's worst sequel, Bill C22, aka the Lawful Access Act, is trying it again. As with most sequels, Bill C-22 makes some tweaks to the problematic elements, but largely retains the same problems. The bill forces digital services, which could include telecoms, messaging apps, and more, to record and retain metadata for a full year, and expands information sharing with foreign governments, including the United States. Metadata can reveal a lot about who you communicate with, where you go, and when you do so. Expanding the collection of metadata would require companies to store even more information about their users than they already do, providing an incentive for bad actors to access that information. Worst of all, Bill C-22 erodes the privacy of millions by providing a mechanism for the Minister of Public Safety to demand companies create a backdoor in their services to provide law enforcement access to data, as long as these mandates don't introduce quote-unquote systemic vulnerability. These widespread surveillance backdoors would likely facilitate even more data breaches than we see already. The bill also bans companies from even revealing the existence of these orders publicly. The definitions of both systemic vulnerabilities and encryption are not clear enough in C-22, leaving wiggle room for the government to demand that companies circumvent encryption. And the overbroad definitions in the bill can include apps as well as operating systems. Canada officials have made it clear that they believe it's possible to add surveillance without introducing systemic vulnerabilities, which is just not true. Surveillance of encrypted communications is fundamentally a systemic vulnerability. The dangers of these sorts of backdoors are not theoretical. In 2022, the Salt Typhoon hack took advantage of a system built by the internet service providers to give law enforcement access to user data. When you build these systems, hackers will come. Canadians deserve strong privacy protections, transparency in how companies handle user data, and clear safeguards around encrypted data. Bill C-22 provides none of that, instead reaching further into the digital pockets of tech companies to build broad, lawful access mechanisms. All right, I mean, we just keep trying this, and in some places these laws actually go into effect. In some cases they get so much pushback that they fail. We can only hope that will happen again here with C-22, but that requires citizens to stand up. We have to attack these attacks on security and on privacy. Mass surveillance is not the key. And circumventing encryption, finding ways around it, is just as bad as breaking it in the first place. So we have to educate our representatives on how encryption works and why it's crucial that we preserve it. FYI, I read in a separate article that Signal, the end-to-end encrypted messenger that most of us recommend that people use, has said that it will leave the Canadian market completely if this bill is passed, just like it threatened to do in the UK when they were trying to pass similar legislation. All right, another one here from the EFF, and this is about Utah targeting VPNs because people were using them to get around their age verification stuff. So before I get into this, there was an update on this. As of May 11th, Utah has agreed to not enforce this new law until September 3rd this year, after it was challenged in court by Pornhub, basically. So it's not going into effect right away, but nevertheless, they are threatening to do this, and, it's still possible this could become law. For the last couple of years, we've watched the same predictable cycle play out across the globe. A state or country passes a clunky age verification mandate, and, without fail, virtual private network or VPN usage surges as residents scramble to maintain their privacy and anonymity. We've seen this everywhere, from states like Florida, Missouri, Texas, and Utah, to countries like the United Kingdom, Australia, and Indonesia. Instead of realizing that mass surveillance and age gates aren't exactly crowd favorites, Utah lawmakers have decided that VPNs themselves are the real issue. On May 6, 2026, Utah will become, and as I said, this has been pushed back, to EFF's knowledge, the first state in the nation to target the use of VPNs to avoid legally mandated age verification gates. While advocates in states like Wisconsin successfully forced the removal of similar provisions due to constitutional and technical concerns, Utah is proceeding with a mandate that threatens to significantly undermine digital privacy rights. Formerly known as the Online Age Verification Amendments, or Senate Bill 73, it was signed by Governor Spencer Cox on May 19th of this year. While the majority of the bill consists of provisions related to a 2% tax on revenues from online adult content that is set to take effect in October, one of the more immediate concerns for EFF is the section regulating VPN access, which goes into effect this coming Wednesday. Again, that's been delayed. The new law explicitly addresses VPN use in Section 14, which amends some other bill, in two main ways. First, regulation based on physical location. Under the law, an individual is considered to be accessing a website from Utah if they are physically located there, regardless of whether they use a VPN, a proxy server, or other means to disguise their geographic location. And two, a ban on sharing VPN instructions. Commercial entities that host a, quote, substantial portion of material harmful to minors, unquote, are now prohibited from facilitating or encouraging the use of a VPN to bypass age checks. This includes providing instructions on how to use a VPN or providing the means to circumventing geofencing. In other words, to find some way to appear to not be in Utah to the website you're going to. By holding companies liable for verifying the age of anyone physically in Utah, even those using a VPN, the law creates a massive liability trap. Just like we argued in the case of the Wisconsin bill, if a website cannot reliably detect a user's true location, and the law requires it do so for all users at a particular state, then the legal risk could push the site to either ban all known VPN IPs or IP addresses, or mandate age verification for every visitor globally. This would subject millions of users to invasive identity checks or blocks to their VPN use, regardless of where they actually live. In practice, Senate Bill 73 is different from the Wisconsin proposal in that it stops short of a total VPN ban. Instead, it discourages using VPNs by imposing the liability described above and by muzzling the websites themselves from sharing information about VPNs. This raises significant First Amendment concerns as it prevents platforms from providing basic, truthful information about a lawful privacy tool to their users. Unlike previous drafts seen in other states, SB 73 doesn't explicitly ban the use of a VPN. Under a don't ask, don't tell style of enforcement, websites likely only have an obligation to ask for proof of age if they actually learn that a user is physically in Utah and using a VPN. If a site doesn't know a user is in Utah, their broader obligation to police VPNs remains murky. So, while SB 73 isn't as extreme as the discarded Wisconsin proposal, it remains a dangerous precedent. Then there is also the question of technical feasibility. Blocking all known VPN and proxy IP address is a technical whack-a-mole that likely no company can win. Providers add new IP addresses constantly, and no comprehensive block list exists. Complying with Utah's requirements would require impossible technical feats. The internet is built to, and will always, route around censorship. If Utah successfully hampers commercial VPN providers, motivated users will transition to non-commercial proxies, private tunnels through cloud services like AWS, or residential proxies that are virtually indistinguishable from standard home traffic. These workarounds will emerge within hours of the law taking effect. Meanwhile, the collateral damage will fall on businesses, journalists, and survivors of abuse who rely on commercial VPNs for essential data security. These provisions won't stop a tech-savvy teenager, but they certainly will impact the privacy of every regular Utah resident who just wants to keep their data out of the hands of brokers or malicious actors. Lawmakers have watched age verification mandates fall, and instead of reconsidering the approach, they decided to wage war on privacy itself. As the Cato Institute states, and this is a quote from them, "The point is that when an internet policy can be avoided by a relatively common technology that often provides significant privacy and security benefits, maybe the policy is the problem. Age verification regimes do plenty of damage to online speech and privacy, but attacking VPNs to try to keep them from being circumvented is doubling down on this damaging approach." And that's the end of their quote. Attacks on VPNs are, at their core, attacks on the tools that enable digital privacy. Utah is setting a precedent that prioritizes government control over the fundamental architecture of a private and secure internet, and it won't stop at the state's borders. Regulators in countries outside the U.S. are still eyeing VPN restrictions, with the UK Children's Commissioner calling VPNs a, quote, loophole that needs closing, unquote, and the French Minister Delegate for Artificial Intelligence and Digital Affairs saying VPNs are, quote, the next topic on my list, unquote, after the country enacted a ban on social media for kids under 15. As this law goes into effect, we are entering uncharted territory. Lawmakers who can't distinguish between a security tool and a loophole are now writing the rules for one of the most complex infrastructures on Earth. And we can assure that the result won't be a safer internet, only an increasingly less private one. So thankfully, this can has been kicked down the road by 4 months or so, 4 or 5 months, because there was inevitably going to be a lawsuit on this. I agree with everything this article said, by far. But what I'm really worried about is that they're just going to keep doing this. And there are things that they might do that wouldn't possibly make this technically feasible. For example, maybe now they require that all VPN and proxy providers have to publish their IP ranges in real time. Like they must maintain a public database. And while that is not perfect, because what that really means is that would just cause these other places to potentially block all VPN IPs, no matter where they're coming from. The next step, honestly, is that they could require the VPN and proxy services to somehow indicate the original region of origin for all of their connections, either state level or country level, as, somehow some part of the metadata of the setup process, which is also very bad. As an engineer, I can't help but think that they could come up with some sort of a technical solution that would make this work. I just hope they don't try that. All right, next up, this is from the New York Times, and it's about chatbots, large language models, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Copilot from Microsoft, wanting access to your health records, and why that it's just not a good idea right now. But I do have some things to say about this. So let me read the article first. For the last few years, the tech industry has convinced people that their artificially intelligent chatbots get better the more data you feed them. The next step is to get users to share their most sensitive information, their health records. What could go wrong? Microsoft this week unveiled a tool that will let users share records from multiple health providers with its chatbot, Copilot. The records can then be combined with data gathered by a user's fitness device, such as an Apple Watch. And after analyzing all that information, the chatbot will come up with a high-level overview of health issues for the user. Microsoft's announcement echoed moves made by Amazon, OpenAI, and Anthropic, which began testing similar tools, Health AI, ChatGPT Health, and Claude for Healthcare, this year. By collecting health data and offering direct feedback, the companies are treading into risky territory. On Microsoft's Copilot site and mobile app, users will be able to click on a Health tab and create a profile by answering questions about their age and sex. From there, users can opt to share their health records and data from devices like an Apple Watch, a Fitbit, or an Aura sleep tracker. Users can then prod the chatbot with questions or symptoms by saying things like, "I haven't been sleeping well." The chatbot then analyzes the health records and wearable data to make observations, such as sleep trends since a recent hospital visit. And let me stop. So basically what they're saying is this is the chatbot synthesizing information. The health information part was it knows from your health records that you recently went to the hospital. And then from your wearables that it's also connected to, it can tell you how you've been sleeping since you came back from the hospital. All right, back to the article. The chatbot can also come up with a bottom line summary of health issues to pay attention to, such as sleep deprivation, diabetes, and limited physical activity. Users will initially be able to try Copilot Health for free when it's released this year. Microsoft said it planned to charge a subscription fee to use the tool, but it did not share a price. Medical records have been chaotic and cumbersome for patients to navigate because the information can be scattered across various databases used by different health providers. A primary care physician could struggle to offer feedback on a foot injury, for example, if the patient's podiatrist used a different record system. Microsoft's AI could help connect the dots for many different health providers along with the user's fitness device data. Microsoft said a doctor would probably need hours to manually review all of a person's medical records and fitness device data to come up with a high-level overview of health. It said Copilot Health could do this in seconds. As healthcare costs have risen, many Americans are dropping coverage. An AI chatbot could be a low-cost way to help people pay closer attention to their health and research information on symptoms, similar to a web search on a site like WebMD. In recent years, cyber attacks have breached hospitals and healthcare systems. Putting health records in a central place makes that information a much more tempting target for criminals, said Matthew Green, an associate professor of computer science at Johns Hopkins University. A victim's health data could expose conditions that he or she would want to keep private. Similarly, law enforcement agencies that want an individual's health records could go to Microsoft instead of multiple providers, says Mario Trujillo, a data privacy lawyer for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a digital rights nonprofit. A woman pursuing reproductive health care in a state with an abortion ban could be at a higher risk, he added. Also, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA, by the way, I always like to point out there that P is not for privacy, it's for portability, which strictly requires traditional healthcare providers to protect patient privacy, does not apply to tech companies offering chatbots. So these companies, which are not healthcare providers, even though they offer similar services, could do what they wished with health records, such as use the information to train their AI or show ads related to a user's health conditions. Microsoft said people's health data would be encrypted and would not be used to improve its AI or serve targeted ads. And I'll just stop to once again say, yet. It also gives law enforcement agencies access to customer data only in response to valid legal requests. And by the way, I think that's just a policy thing that is not required by law. A study published last month analyzed several chatbots, including those from OpenAI and Meta, and found that they were no better than a web search at guiding users toward the correct diagnoses or helping them determine what they should do next. And the technology posed unique risks, sometimes presenting false information or drastically changing its advice depending on slight changes in the wording of the questions. Another risk is that a chatbot's basic summaries of health problems could create anxiety, said Dr. Lisa Piercy, a former health commissioner for Tennessee. A sinus headache this time of year is likely to be a symptom of allergies, but a chatbot could raise the possibility of a more serious condition that spurs an unnecessary visit to the doctor. All right, so there's a few points I want to make about this. First of all, AI definitely could provide value here. AI is exceptionally good at ingesting tons of related data and finding patterns. It is really, really good at that. And it could do it way faster than a human could do it. Now, obviously, it can also make mistakes, but then so can a human. So, they're different in how they make mistakes, but nevertheless, these LLMs are quite good at that particular kind of task. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. This technology could be used for good, but it would absolutely have to be 100% private, and that probably means it needs to be 100% local. In other words, not cloud-based. And by the way, I want to bring this back to something I mentioned in the last news show when we were talking about doctors using AI to transcribe session notes. I said that was a bad idea, but what I didn't say then, and I will say now, is we could be doing that locally using AI. In other words, right there on that doctor's laptop, for example, or even on an iPad, or maybe in some sort of a device in the office, but it never leaves the office. That would certainly help with the privacy aspect of this. But there are still other issues that we talked about last time about, would you be as open if you thought you were being constantly recorded? But, if it was purely local and, the doctor takes their laptop or iPad and sets it on the stool in front of you with a big pause button on it, and giving you the option to pause whenever you want to pause the recording, maybe that could still work. Anyway, we have the ability to do AI like this, locally, securely, and privately. But it remains to be seen if we will ever actually do it this way. If for no other reason, then that data is very valuable. So I'm guessing that these systems that these companies are going to be producing that do these things will be cheaper to the doctors if they allow the patient data to be used. And those companies will probably swear up and down that they are going to encrypt that data like crazy, and they're going to anonymize that data. But just realize that anonymization claims, especially for things like medical data, are almost impossible to do right. If I knew your ailments and prescriptions, I could figure out that it's you. All right, this next one's from the Proton blog, which they cover some really good security and privacy stories. I mean, they always end up by promoting their products, and I usually don't read that part. But this is an interesting one. Oh gosh. And it's just another reason not to use Microsoft Edge, their browser on Windows. Okay. So from Proton, if you save passwords in Microsoft Edge, in other words, if you let the Microsoft Edge browser remember your login information for you, there's a security risk you should know about. According to a new disclosure, whenever you open Edge, the browser immediately loads all saved passwords into memory in readable form, not just the password for the website you're logging into. That means credentials for every account saved in Edge could be exposed if malware, a compromised admin account, or another attacker gains access to your device or your user session. The finding was disclosed by a security researcher, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce this person's name. First name is Tom, we're going to go with that, who says Microsoft's response was that the behavior is quote-unquote by design. Microsoft's own documentation says Edge encrypts saved passwords on disk using AES, the advanced encryption standard, which, by the way, that's a real thing, and that's good, and acknowledges that passwords can be exposed if the user session or device is compromised. The new disclosure does not dispute that, but raises a different concern. Edge loads all saved passwords into readable memory as soon as the browser launches, making memory scraping far more valuable if an attacker gains sufficient access. Passwords are supposed to be protected by encryption when stored. Encryption turns a readable password in plain text into unreadable data, or ciphertext. To use that password for autofill, a browser eventually has to decrypt it back into readable form. The important question is, how much password data becomes readable at once? And this same researcher, Tom, says Microsoft Edge loads all saved passwords into the browser's memory in plain text as soon as it launches, instead of only decrypting a specific password when it's needed. This includes all passwords saved in the Edge password manager, even those for websites you don't visit or autofill during the current browsing session. The researcher tested this behavior across multiple Chromium-based browsers, including Google Chrome, Brave, Vivaldi, Opera, and Microsoft Edge, and only Edge exhibited this behavior. And then a different security researcher, Rob Vanderbrink from SANS Institute, reproduced the issue by leaving Microsoft Edge open and analyzing a memory dump of the running browser session. He demonstrated how a logged-in Windows user can dump their stored Edge credentials without additional rights, which also means malware running as that user could potentially access those credentials too. If an attacker gains sufficient access to the device or user session, they may be able to inspect the browser's memory. If only one password is decrypted when needed, the attacker has a smaller window and less data to capture. But if every saved password is already sitting in memory unprotected by encryption, memory scraping becomes far more valuable. This doesn't mean every Microsoft Edge user has been hacked, but individuals and organizations should reconsider whether Edge is the right place to store credentials. Here's what you could do to stay safe. First of all, stop using the Microsoft Edge to store your passwords. Use a password manager. Second, if you do migrate to using a dedicated secure password manager, like, Bitwarden or 1Password or something, once you've done that and you moved all your passwords and you're sure they're all there, then go back and delete all the saved passwords in Edge. In other words, after you've migrated everything over, go back and delete the other data. Otherwise, it's still sitting there. And then when you're there, turn off the option in the Edge browser to save passwords and to try to provide those passwords. It's in settings somewhere. And then finally, enable two-factor authentication wherever possible, which makes that at least a second step. So even if your passwords are exposed somehow, they would still need the two-factor device to get into those accounts. So for me, the obvious answer to this is, for the love of all that's good, don't use the Edge browser. I hate the Chrome browser. The Edge browser is worse. Use a privacy-respecting browser. Most of these browsers are secure, except we've just shown Microsoft Edge has way poorer security than most other Chromium-based browsers. My guess is, honestly, they will be forced to change this. But nevertheless, there's a lot of other reasons to not use Edge. And so if you're using Edge for some reason, it is the default browser in Windows, please install Brave or Firefox, something else that's privacy-respecting. If you search on either Brave or Firefox on my website, you'll find articles where I talk about better browsers. Now, I will say one thing. Microsoft, I think basically what they're saying is, look, if your computer is compromised, all bets are off anyway. And which is actually kind of what Signal said way back when, because it was actually storing your messages. The Signal app for Windows or Mac was storing your messages on your computer in plain text. Now, your hard drive is probably encrypted. But they were kind of making the same argument, but then after a lot of blowback, they finally said, you know what, you're right. And they actually copped to it. They said, we really should be encrypted those anyway. There's no reason not to have built-in suspenders. And my guess is Microsoft will be forced to do the same. But like I said, there's a lot of other reasons, privacy reasons in particular, that you should not be using the Edge browser. All right, another quickie here from 404 Media. And I just wanted to mention this. I probably could have done this earlier in the show when I was kind of doing some short articles. In fact, I'm not even going to read this one the whole way through, but Canvas is a program used by schools for homework and assignments and also messaging, private messaging boards between students and between students and teachers. It's very popular. It's used everywhere. And because it's really popular and because it has a lot of juicy data in it, it makes it a target for hackers. And so the parent company called Instructure was hit with ransomware. And it was right during when most kids were doing finals, which I'm sure was not a coincidence, and threw everything into chaos and a lot of schools around the US, including colleges. If you have kids in school, my guess is you know what I'm talking about. Now, they got it back up and running soon, and the word on the street is that the company actually paid the ransom, and, the ransomware people swore up and down with proof videos that they deleted all the students' data and returned the data to the schools that was held for ransom. But you never know. So there's honestly not a whole lot more to say about it than this. It affected hundreds of millions of individuals' data, that included things like email addresses, names, student IDs, and what's probably going to be the worst part is a lot of messages between students and also teachers. That could be pretty juicy. So if you're a student or a teacher that uses Canvas, I would assume that this data is, in fact, still out there and may pop up again later. I'm not sure what the statistics are on that, but there definitely have been cases where these ransomware gangs that said they deleted the data, even tried to prove that they deleted that data. There's really no way to do that. They could have made other copies that you're not aware of. And there have been documented cases of them keeping that data after they said they deleted it. So there's two other just high-level issues here. First of all, that we have one product that is so popular that it's used everywhere so that it becomes a target. So, we need more competition and we need less data centralization. But also from a technical standpoint, this data should have been compartmentalized. Like there should not have been one way to access all the data of all the students and all the teachers and all the schools in one go. All right, one more article today, and this one's from the Register. They're always a little bit cheeky in the way that they write their stories. And when it comes to Google Chrome and silently installing 4 gigabytes worth of LLM on everyone's computers, I think it's proper to be a little snarky. So the Register says Google Chrome will steal 4 gigabytes of disk space from your computer for its local large language model, or LLM, unless you opt it out. It's called weights.bin, and it's stored in a folder called opt guide on device model. What's more, if you track down the file and delete it, Chrome will download a fresh copy and reinstate it. The discovery was announced this week by Alexander Humph, who blogs as The Privacy Guy, in a somewhat sensationally titled blog post, and this is the title, Google Chrome silently installs a 4 gigabyte A model on your device without consent. At $1 billion device scale, the climate costs are insane. In other words, if you're putting this on 1 billion people's computers and it's running all the time, then that could, have a lot of energy costs. It doesn't seem to be new, though. There are signs that Chrome has been doing this for quite some time. In April of 2025, this Reddit post suggests that the model was just 3 gigabytes. But a Stack Overflow question says that by November of 2025, it was already up to 4 gigabytes. We would not be at all surprised if it soon went to 5. This is what Google calls the nano version of its Gemini local LLM, which powers its prompt API. That page links to general info about Google's Gemini LLM, but the site about its use on Android has some specific info about Gemini Nano. If you didn't opt out, Google has some info on how to disable it. In brief, in Chrome's address box, enter the special URL chrome://flags. In the resulting page, look for an entry named Optimization Guide on Device Model and set it to disabled. Then restart Chrome. The browser should then delete the weights.bin file, which means you don't have to go find it yourself and delete it. Okay, so that's something you'll probably won't remember, so you could look in the show notes if you want to look that up later. But there's more nuance to this story. Okay, so behind this whole local AI model is this new API, and this talked about it here, this prompt API. What Google's trying to do here, apparently, is define a standardized interface for web browsers to access a large language model. So in other words, it comes up with a generic way for the browser to make AI chatbot style requests and for the user to plug in whichever one they want to use. And that might be a local model and it might be a cloud-based model. It could be whatever they want. The whole point of having this API is to kind of abstract that away from the browser so the browser doesn't need to know or care what large language model is behind it. It can make a standard set of queries and expect responses in a certain way. And now, standards are great. As an engineer, I like standards. However, Google imposed this standard unilaterally, apparently without reviewing it first with actual independent internet standards groups. And because Google, with Chrome and Chromium-based browsers, owns over like 90% of the entire web browser market, it can basically decree standards by fiat. So these standards will almost certainly benefit Google and deter competition. And it turns out, as part of doing this, Google also decided on its own, unilaterally, without your consent, or without even telling you, that they were going to automatically download and install one of their large language models, this Gemini Nano, onto everyone's machine that is running Chrome. Unless you have already, like I hope you have, disabled Chrome's AI features. This is what Steve Gibson calls the tyranny of the default. They know that people aren't going to go checking for this. If you hadn't heard this story, you probably wouldn't even know that it happened. It would probably download this huge file in the background. You'd be sitting on 4 gigabytes of data that you don't realize you have on your hard drive other than it taking up space. And it would just be there. And Google just decided this on your behalf for you. But if there's a silver lining to any of this, and that is that local AI, like this Nano thing running on your box, is still a good thing. That is definitely the way to get a private AI. Now, given that this is coming from Google, I'm not sure that that would guarantee in this case that it would be private, but it could be. So anyway, I look forward to the day when, most of our common AI-based tasks are processed on all of our own devices. If not directly, then on some sort of maybe like an AI hub. Maybe this is an appliance that we'll all have someday in our home. Because that is really the way to do this in a way that you can trust it and keep your data private. Okay, so now it's time for the tip of the week, such as it is, because you're probably going to want to read the article for the details here, because it's a lot of step-by-step stuff that doesn't make sense to put into a podcast. So I'm just going to kind of explain what the article's about, and then you could go to the show notes to follow the link. If you're actually doing this, if you're following with me and going through this process, you're going to want to see the articles. But if you recall, last week I mentioned that we were going to be doing a series of articles, or tips of the week in this case, about how to download all of your old historical emails so that you can have them locally stored on your machine and find creative ways to back those up if you want to. And then, crucially, delete them from the cloud. So again, why would you want to do that? Well, as we've seen today, and we've actually seen for years, all that juicy data is sitting out there waiting to be exploited or leaked or stolen or whatever. You might think your emails are just tame and generic and doesn't have anything interesting, but we send a lot of very interesting things to our emails, like travel plans, appointments, purchases, and also it shows our social graph, everybody that we've ever talked to, how often and when. There's a lot of really juicy personal information you can piece together if you've got access to someone's entire history of emails. And now the new threat is that Google and Yahoo and Microsoft and everybody's sitting on potentially years and years of people's emails, going through all those emails and using it to train their AI models on because they're desperate to find new and more data for those, and or mine that data to market something to you. And again, look at your social graph, figure out everybody that you know. So it's not just about you, it's about all the people you know as well. Okay, so I won't go through the rationale all over again, but what we're trying to do here is we're trying to specifically download all of your old emails from Google, Gmail, Yahoo Mail, and Microsoft or Outlook. In the old days, it was Hotmail. So we want to first make a copy of all of that, because there is some information there. I don't know about you. There's information there that I would like to be able to go back to, potentially. I mean, I suppose if you know for a fact that you really don't care about all those old emails, you could just jump to the part where you deleted it all. But I think it would be smart to make a copy of that. So what we're going to do this week is we're actually going to download a full copy of all of your historical email. Now, as I record this, I have not finished writing the blog article yet. Usually I would have done that by now. My schedule's kind of thrown off this week. So I've been focusing on the 3 most popular ones. Again, Gmail, Yahoo Mail, and Outlook. They work slightly differently. And I actually thought we'd be able to do some magic with Google because they do offer through their Google Takeout service a way for you to download all of your email into a nice Mbox file. Turns out that Mbox file is not nearly as usable as I was hoping it was going to be. And by the way, let me let me also just say that this is something I've been wanting to do for myself for a long time. I have got accounts with all three of those. I've stopped using them, but I still have all my historical emails, and I've been wanting to download them for a long time. So I thought, hey, let's do this together. As I go through this, I will write the blog articles about my experience and share it with you and tell you how you can do it too. So this is something I have not actually done myself yet, and I'm kind of going along at the pace of writing these articles as I do it. And while this should be easy, it turns out it's not. I mean, all of these email services are basically cloud-based before we even talked about cloud. It was really one of the first internet services that we all had. But these companies store copies of your email on their servers so that wherever you log in from, you have access to them. But the email apps that we use, mostly on our phones now, but also on our computers, are meant to kind of look at that information that's out on the cloud. And it will have some local copies, but not a full local copy, often, of all of your historical emails. For the really old ones, it probably just has the email headers. And when you go back 5 years to find that one email and click on it, it might take a few seconds to read because it's actually fetching the data from the cloud. Because it likely doesn't have all of your email, 100%, downloaded in local copies on your computer or on your phone, certainly. So we need to do that here. And so after much going around and much thought, here's the plan I've come up with. I'm going to recommend that you download an email client app that you probably don't already have called Thunderbird from Mozilla. And I'm kind of counting on the fact that most of you doing this don't already have it, because I want this particular email client, Thunderbird, to be for your archive, not for your regular email. Now, if you do use Thunderbird, don't worry, I'll talk about that in the article as well. But the point here being, I want this to be a different email client for you. I want this to be the one you go to look at your archive. And the way we're going to do this is you basically take your email client, like any email client, and you set it up for your account, for Gmail, for Yahoo, for Outlook. And you make the connections, you put in your credentials. There's different ways of doing that. And you set it up for IMAP, IMAP. That's the modern email protocol. But you have to, in this case, make a point of saying, no, I want you to get everything. Like, don't just give me the headers. I want you to get a full copy of all of my historical email. And just to give you an example, as an engineer, I jumped on these things early. My Yahoo email account, I'm sure, goes back to the late 90s, whenever it started. And my Gmail account goes back to at least 2005, and it was released in 2004. And I use Gmail a lot. Before Google and shitified, I used Gmail a lot, all the time. It was my go-to email. And so I have over 100,000 emails from 20 years. And a lot of those emails have attachments. So it's something like, I think, 7 gigabytes worth of stuff. And for text stuff, that's a lot. So anyway, what this article will walk you through is it will walk you through downloading and setting up Thunderbird, connecting it to, we're going to start with Gmail, and we'll see if I get to Yahoo and Outlook this time. That may be the next article. But Gmail by far is the most popular. So it'll help you hook up Thunderbird to your Google account and tell you how to set all the proper settings so that it downloads full copies of your entire email history. That's what we're going to do this week. And trust me, that will take a long time. I started mine. Mine has been running for over 24 hours and it's still not done. And then once it's all downloaded, you want Thunderbird actually to go and index all that email so it's searchable. So that is what the article this week will tell you. The article link is in the show notes. This is the next step in the process. And then we'll do Yahoo and we'll do Outlook. Then I'll tell you how to make good backups of all that data, how to re-export that email into a usable form that you could back up somewhere else for safekeeping. And then finally, we'll talk about how to go to each of those services and tell them to delete all of your old historical emails, because now you have your own personal backed up copies of those, and you have no reason to keep a copy of those up in the cloud. Now, this sort of implies that you want to move on to some other email service provider, which I did talk about last week as well. I would recommend Proton Mail, for example, or maybe Tuta, Tuta, for your personal stuff, your most private emails, and then something else for maybe public emails, newsletters and email addresses that you give out to doctors and whatever else. For that, I use Fastmail, but you could use something else as well. So anyway, I covered that. in the last article if you want to go back and check that. All right, there you go. There is your news and your tip of the week. All right, that's going to do it for this week, everybody. For my top patrons, you'll be getting your Merlin's Musings episode on Thursday as usual, and I'm gonna talk about a lot of the things I struggled with trying to get this email stuff going. I hit a lot of roadblocks, and I basically saved you the trouble of hitting those, I hope. But sometimes I like to do behind the scenes stuff for my bonus podcast, so I'll be talking about the various speed bumps that I hit on the way trying to make this work. And looking ahead, we've got some great interviews. My interview about employee surveillance by employers will be the next interview here. That'll be next week. That was a panel discussion that was quite good. And then I just talked to Rainey Reitman, who is the head of the Freedom of the Press Foundation. She's got a new book out called Transaction Denied about basically financial censorship. So we'll be having a discussion about digital rights and what you can do about it. And the stories she has are just amazing. As I was reading her book, I just kept shaking my head like, that cannot be legal. But it turns out you really don't have a lot of protections and rights when it comes to banking, at least here in the US. Down the line, I'll be talking with the CEO and founder of another AI company that's privacy-oriented with some interesting technical things. It's in a kind of like Proton Lumo, but in a different way, called Empathy.ai. And then, as I mentioned recently, I was hoping to get Nate Wessler back on the show from the ACLU. He and I have been talking, and he is down to do another interview, so he'll be coming up later this summer. And then it's time for Hacker Summer Camp out in Vegas in August. And at that point, we'll be on the countdown to 500, the 500th episode of Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. All right, that's going to do it for this week, everybody. Take care, stay safe, and until next time, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.